what I have here is a scene with two guys fighting, and what I want to do today is a slightly different approach. Usually when I do a tutorial, I talk you through the exact processes so that you can specifically follow what I've done. But today I'm going to be talking more in generalities so that you can learn how to compose your scenes better. So this scene, I think you'll agree, is a bit of a noisy mess, you know. Ignore the lighting and stuff for now, but just the amount of stuff in the background, the colours, everything here makes this scene hard to read. And there's a word in art and in 3D particularly called legibility, and legibility is how easily you can read the scene. So it's very famous with Disney, for example, that they think about the silhouettes of the characters and the outlines of the characters, what's in the background. And I see very often in Poser that people get confused or perhaps misled would be a better idea with their scenes. What they understand that the real world doesn't comprise of just a simple background plus whatever characters you want to put into it. So what they do is they start adding props such as, you know, this mud pile here and this log here, this log over here, these trees. They start adding props to make the scene look more interesting, but they actually clutter the scene up. So what I would say today we're looking at are two opposing perspectives. There's adding details and there's decluttering your scene so that the silhouette of your figures can be seen more legibly. So let me just compare this scene to the finished one that I'm going to take you to, which is here. And I think you'll agree that this one is far easier to read than this scene. Now, there are limitations within Poser with lighting and things like that, but this is certainly a much better scene. There's plenty of detail, but it's also a lot easier to read what's going on. If you go into this scene, for example, this guy over here, they're both Michael 4 figures. This guy is kneeling down and he's using a pirate cutlass to slash at his stomach. This guy's wearing wolf leathers and he's got two martial arts weapons called kama. That's like a blade on a stick here. But had I not pointed them out, it's not very easy to read where this blade even was. And this blade looks a bit weird, and unless you knew this was in his hand, it kind of looks like it's sticking out of his back. Maybe it's the back of this sword, who knows, you know. But in this other scene, now you can tell that exactly where this camera is because it's silhouetted against this sky. You can tell that this camera is actually attached to his hand, albeit barely. The cutlass slash is highlighted by this blood splat. Their profiles, or their silhouettes, if you like, are nicely clarified against a clear background, and there's a lot more going on here. So let me talk first of all about some of the things that are wrong with this scene. So So the main thing going on with this scene is that the lighting is terrible, so they blend into the background. There's too much clutter behind them here. There's they blend into the floor here. They're the same kind of colour blending into the floor, and there are just no clear profiles here. So I'm just going to show you this one. So the first thing that I did was to simplify the lighting. So it had the default Poser 12 lighting, which looks great on indoors but not so great outdoors. So what I've done here is I've just added I've deleted the 4 basic Poser lights and I've replaced it with a single infinite light that's kind of shining in just below just above ground level, kind of slightly off to the side over here. And so what that does is it just gives us much clearer shadows, much easier to pull out details like this detail here on the leathers here. It just shows up. Now, another problem you'll often find is that the old Poser 4 clothes and characters, the textures don't show up well in Poser 12 Superfly. They look fine in the preview often, and then when you go to render them, they render completely horribly. And this Nakila thing here, even in the preview, it shows as black because there's some weird stuff going on in the materials. So you may need to sort out your materials. But before we do that, just go back to this other image. If I can whip this across, you'll see here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 trees, plus this kind of dead wood here, plus 2 logs here. So that's 7 different things all kind of imposing themselves. And even though this tree's off to the side, see its leaves are kind of coming down here, these leaves are coming over here, the tree's off to the side, but the leaves are disguising what's going on up here where the raised camera is. So the first thing that I did was I think I deleted this tree. Let's have a look. Yeah, I deleted that tree, so I've reduced it down to 3 trees, and I've moved the trees out of the line of sight. So these 2 trees that were quite close, this one here and this one, I moved them backwards in the Z depth in the scene, so they're further away. Then I moved this one over to here, this one over to here, left this one in the foreground, but just rotated it so these leaves are not interfering with the scene. So let's just compare that again. If I can get it to show me the other scene. There. So you see this one's still in the foreground, and these 2 trees have been moved off to the side, and the other tree has been deleted entirely. See that white tree on the side here has just been deleted entirely. And this log in the middle, you might be tempted to think that's adding interest, but in actual fact it was destroying this center profile. It's your eye is naturally drawn to the center of the image unless you lead it around the scene with various objects going on. In this particular case, your eye will naturally come to this void space in between these 2 figures, and then what do you see? You see the log rather than the sword. So what I did was I got rid of that entirely, and you'll see that log's not in the scene at all. This log I left there, and then what I've done is this scene was built with this floor here, and this, it's called a rock but it looks more like a dirt pile, and this kind of dead wood here, all in a single object. So you couldn't just hide one part or another. And when you get that happen, what you have to do is go to the material room. So if I go to the material room now and select that kind of dirt pile there, you'll see it actually shows up as rock. And just make it transparent. 1 to make it completely transparent. Often what you'll need to do is also turn if there's a specular component, make sure you turn the specular down to 0 as well, or it will still be visible. And I'm just going to do the same with this deadwood over here. Trunk. So you'll see this is all part of North Bank. But look, North Bank, the elements of North Bank. Trunk, stream bank, stone, rock. There's lots of elements there. They would have been much better off individual, so that I could just make them visible or invisible or move them around as I want. But this gave the artist control of their position relative to each other. But to be honest, I'd sooner have that control. Right, so I'm going to make that transparent as well. That's the deadwood there. So we'll see now, if I look at my actual live scene, that deadwood and that pile that was here have now disappeared. So the next thing I did, this sky dome at the back, in the original image, if I look at the original rendered image here, you'll see it's kind of got trees here, trees and bushes here, and it creates a kind of a dark silhouette behind them. So what I did was I simply rotated that sky dome round so that there was a nice bright clear patch in this space in between them. Admittedly, there's some trees there, but that's the clearest I could get it without going in and changing the sky dome in Photoshop. Okay, so the next thing I did was, see their clothes are kind of earth tones here, and then the ground is very earth tony as well. So what I did, I desaturated the floor here. So what I did, I just put in a HSV node in between the color and the diffuse node here. Here's a HSV, and then I just use that to turn the saturation down a little bit. So the default would have been 1, I just turned it down to 0.7, and what that does is goes from this bright vivid color down to a slightly more muted color, and that muted color then allows their earth tones of their clothes to contrast a little bit more. There are other ways I could have done that. I could have just turned down the brightness, but this was just a little bit more of a subtle way of doing it. Something else that I've done here is I've added a blood splodge here. This is one of my own products that I designed in Real Flow, and it's a splatter kind of thing, and it just draws your attention now. So this area here is kind of clear. Oh, incidentally, I also moved the sky dome down so that there would be more clear air in between them now, and now you can see his attention's drawn to this guy where he was going to hack him. This guy's dropped underneath whatever he was going to do. The sword leads up towards this, and then the blood splat shows exactly where the sword is and what it's doing. Okay, so I already mentioned having to make the textures Superfly friendly, but something else I did, if you see along here, they've got kind of highlights on their edges here, and there's highlights here, and then this camera's got a highlight, see, just down the edge of his hand up here, and what that's called is rim lighting. So what we do is we put, it's not realistic, although there is a bright spot at the back there, a bright light back there. What I've done is I've added 2 rim lights right in the middle of the scene. This one's pointing towards, it's behind. If I just go to a top view here, let's see if I can zoom in on that. Okay, it's going to be rather dark, but you'll be able to see it. So here's my 2 figures, and you can see that my 2 rim lights are behind them. So this one kind of shoots at this guy, and this one faces towards this guy. This one's lower, and what it does is it kind of points upwards from behind and creates these little details here. So professionals or photographers would say that it pulls him out of the background, so it separates him from the background. Look, if I show you here, see the way he's just kind of merged in there, it's all kind of muddy. Even without the trees, he would still be blending into the background, but by adding these rear lights, these rim lights, you get these kind of highlights here and here, and the blade of the camera is more brightly lit now, and here you've got this lovely rim around his face, just kind of adding more interest here, this rim along his leg, this rim up the front of his body, and it just creates some separation between the character and the background. So again, that comes down to legibility. And now, having removed things to declutter the scene, now I can start to add points of interest again. So what I did, I added 2 squirrels and a little bird here. Then I've got 2 pigeons flying in the distant background. I've got a horse and a foal in the background here, and I've got a cluster of 3 sheep here. Now, let me just show you something. In the scene, you can see that they're quite oh well, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll render it and it will make the point more clearly. If I render with the default settings, what happens is that the background images will be just as sharp as the foreground images, and what that does is it creates competition for your eye, especially when the colours are all very similar, when they are all highly saturated or all equally muted. You'll notice here, okay, I've got that set to sorry, I'm going to turn that level down, it's going to take a needlessly long time to render. I had that set to 20 samples, I think. Yep. So I'll turn that down to 5 and render that. It'll be much quicker. So when the foreground and the background images are all using a similar saturation or a similar amount of brightness, and they're all in perfect focus, as you would get with a high f-stop on a camera, what happens is here, again, although we've got these rim lights here, the background's competing a bit overly with the foreground here. So let me just delete that. So compare that to the lighting is the same, everything else is the same, but compare that to that. Watch these blurs happen here on the background image, the animals and stuff, and even these pigeons. Now they're out of focus, so that makes these foreground images nice and sharp, and they become legible. And that's done by using the depth of field setting, activating depth of field in render settings here. And here's the difficult bit, not very difficult. You go to your camera, your scene camera, and then you have to change the focus distance. So I'm at 17028. So when I start to move that, you will see that indicator shows where the lens is focusing. So I want to focus where his head is. So there you go. That'll do. Okay. And then what I need to do is to move the f-stop down and do some test renders until I get that nice out of focus background as we had here. Okay. So going back to the other stuff, adding interest again, I added a bird here, sheep, horses, 2 squirrels and 2 birds. And the reason that you add those, but out of the central focal area, so if I'd moved this bird down to here, your eye again would be drawn to that. But by moving these things to the peripheral areas, they reward people who examine the image a bit more in detail. So obviously you look at this scene, immediately now your eye is drawn to this profile here between these guys, and then because of the bright red contrast with the dark suit and this sword leading up towards it, you're drawn to the important part of what's happening in this image. But then if you continue to look around, okay, well the background's out of focus, so that's not so easy to pick anything out, but there's some contrasting colours against the background, so your eye will pick those up. And then you continue to look deeper. Okay, well now we've got some kind of silhouette going on here. That's a squirrel. We've got a colour contrast here against the base of the tree. We've got a strong colour contrast here, which is leading you down to this whole area. Then there's a little reward here, this little sparrow sitting on here. And then you continue to look deeper. Now out of focus is this little trio of sheep. And this, again, the contrast, the dark against the lighter colour, these 2 horses eating here. So there are multiple levels of reward for the person who examines the scene more closely. So I hope that you'll understand, guys, that the way that you design your scene can lead people around the scene, lead their eye around the scene, and can also provide a much more rewarding experience. So as I say, this is not a master level scene. This is, it's an okay scene, but it's not magnificent or anything. If I were going to do this for something more important, I would change this entire ground texture because it's very low resolution, and I'll change it for something which contrasts better. Maybe I'd make it dirt or grass or something. And I'd probably take a lot more trouble on the lighting, to be honest. But you can see here, just by decluttering the central area, so I'm thinking about the silhouette, even here where his hand goes up here, it's a white hand against a dark background, so that's very legible. Dark head here against a light background, dark colours of the clothing here against a very light background. The sky lightness is in the right colour to make these black backgrounds clear. The rim lighting helps to accentuate the characters against the background. So constructing an image, there's a lot that you can do beyond just simply throwing everything at the image and hoping that it just works. So I hope you found that useful, guys, and if there's anything in this that you want a bit more detail on, let me know and I'll try and make a video on it. You have a great day.